That Canadian guy in Arabiata 2 is P4. Jason Short from New Zealand in Scarperia is second. The race dictator from New Zealand in Rectilineo is P3. Todd in Rectilineo is P1. The race dictator in Laco is third. Todd in Casanova is first. Johnny Prince from New Zealand in Arabiata 1 is PA. YH8 Racing is P7. Todd from New Zealand in Buchine is P1. That Canadian guy in Rectilineo is fourth. The race dictator from New Zealand is third. Jason Short in Materassi is P2. Best lap is a 1:58.600. Chris Butt in San Donato is 10th. Jason Short in Pelagio is second, driving a Toyota. That Canadian guy is P4. race dictator in Rettilineo is third. Johnny Prince in Rettilineo is P8. Best lap is a 3:42.535. YH8 Racing in Poggio Seco is P6. Best lap is a 2:01.009. The race dictator in Arrabbiata 2 is third, driving a Porsche. That Canadian guy in Arrabbiata 2 is fourth. Jason Short is P2. Chris Butt in Scarperia is 9th. YH8 Racing in Rettilineo is 6th. Best lap is a 2:00.905. Todd in Casanova is first. The qualification session is at Autodromo del Mugello in Scarperia, Italy. Todd from New Zealand is P17. YH8 Racing from New Zealand in Rettilineo is second. Jason Short from New Zealand is second. The race dictator from New Zealand is P1. Todd in Borgo San Lorenzo is 7th. Jason Short is P2. YH8 Racing is P5. 10 minutes remaining in the session. Chris Bunnett from New Zealand in Retilaneo is third. The race dictator in Retilaneo is P1. The race dictator is up 16.48 in Monte Rossi. The race dictator is up 16.81 in Arrabbiata 1. The race dictator is up 16.80 in Corintaio. The race dictator improved his P1 with a 158.880. Jason Short is provisional pole with a 158.362. Illisv is fourth. Illisv improved his third with a 201.016. 2.654 off pole. The race dictator in Poggio Seco is P3 up 0.16. Illisv from New Zealand is P4 up 0.29. Chris Bunnett is P7 up 4.76. Chris Bunnett is up 5.20 in Arrabbiata 1. YH8 Racing in Arrabbiata 2 is P6 up 0.36. Chris Bunnett is 7th up 5.03. Chris Bunnett is up 5.62 in Buccine. Chris Bunnett improved his P7 with a 202.755. 4.393 off pole. Johnny Prince from New Zealand in Casanova is P5 up 0.38. Five minutes remaining in the session. Johnny Prince is up 0.71 in Scarperia. Johnny Prince is up 0.86 in Biondetti. YH8 Racing in Biondetti is 8th up 0.21 driving a Toyota. YH8 Racing improved his P8 with a 202.054. 3.692 off pole. The race dictator in Poggio Seco is P3 up 0.39. The race dictator is up 0.37 in Savelli. The race dictator is up 0.38 in Scarperia. That Canadian guy from Canada in Corinthio is second up 0.18. That Canadian guy is provisional pole with a 158.319. Johnny Prince in Materassi is P5 up 0.39. The race dictator in Borgo San Lorenzo is P3 up 0.26. The race dictator is up 0.27 in Arrabbiata 2. The race dictator is up 0.35 in Corinthio. The qualifying session is now in overtime. The race dictator improved his P3 with a 158.642. 0.323 off pole. YH8 Racing in Bucine is 8th up 0.11. Todd in Bucine is P4. Best lap is a 159.175. 0.856 off pole. Illisp is P6. Illisp improved his 5th with a 200.723. 2.404 off pole. Broadcast bot is 20th. The race session is at Autodromo del Mugello in Scarperia, Italy. That Canadian guy is first. Jason Short from New Zealand is second. The race dictator from New Zealand is third. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Jason Short is second. The race dictator in Poggio Seco is P3. The race dictator is now second. That Canadian guy from Canada in Borgo San Lorenzo is third. The race dictator in Arrabbiata 1 is second. That Canadian guy in Scarperia is third. The race dictator in Corintaio is P2. Illisp from New Zealand is P4. That Canadian guy in Rettilineo on lap 1 is P3, 0.9 ahead of Illisp. Illisp from New Zealand in Rettilineo is 4th, 0.5 ahead of YH8 Racing. That Canadian guy in Poggio Seco on lap 2 is 3rd, 0.9 ahead of Illisp. Illisp in Borgo San Lorenzo on lap 2 is P4, 0.6 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing from New Zealand is 5th, 0.7 behind Illisp. Chris Butt from New Zealand in Arabiata 1 is 8th, 0.9 behind Johnny Prince. Chris Butt passed Johnny Prince for 7th. YH8 Racing in Corintaio on lap 2 is 5th, 0.3 behind Illisp. That Canadian guy in Buccine on lap 2 is P3, 1.2 behind the race dictator. YH8 Racing in Rettilineo is P5. Best lap is a 2:11.459. 12.969 off the fastest lap. Illisp in San Donato is P4 driving a McLaren, 0.3 ahead of YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing is P5, 1.5 behind Illisp. Johnny Prince from New Zealand on lap 3 is 8th, 0.9 behind Chris Butt. Chris Butt was 3.0 faster last lap. 15 minutes remaining in the session. YH8 Racing in Arabiata 2 is P5, 0.9 behind Illisp. The race dictator in Corintaio is 2nd. Best lap is a 1:58.704. 0.214 off the fastest lap. YH8 Racing in Buccine is 5th, 1.3 behind Illisp. The race dictator is P2. Best lap is a 1:58.628. 0.175 off the fastest lap. YH8 Racing in Poggio Seco is 5th, 1.5 behind Illisp. The race dictator in Casanova is P2, 1.0 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy in Arabiata 2 is P3, 1.8 behind the race dictator. The race dictator is 2nd, 0.4 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is 3rd, 1.6 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in red Tilaneo is P2, 0.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in San Donato is P2 battling the race dictator. Jason Short passed the race dictator for first. The race dictator in Poggio Seco is second, 0.5 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy in Borgo San Lorenzo is third driving a Toyota, 0.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Arrabbiata 1 on lap 5 is P2, 0.3 behind Jason Short. The race dictator was 1.2 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in Scarperia is P3. Best lap is a 1:58.453. The race dictator in Correntallo on lap 5 is second, 0.3 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is third. "10 minutes remaining in the session. The race dictator in red Tilaneo is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in San Donato is third, 0.3 behind the race dictator. That Canadian guy was 1.1 faster last lap. The race dictator is second, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy is third, 0.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Arrabbiata 1 is second, 0.5 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy in Pelagio is third, 0.7 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in Correntallo is P2, 0.7 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy was 1.1 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in Buccine is third driving a Toyota, 0.4 behind the race dictator. The race dictator in red Tilaneo is P2, 0.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in San Donato is P3, 0.3 behind the race dictator. The race dictator on lap 7 is third battling that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Savelli is second, 0.4 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator from New Zealand in Arabiata 2 is P3, 0.2 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Quarantayo is P2 driving a Toyota, 0.2 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator is P3, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in red Tilaneo is second. The race dictator in San Donato is third, 0.8 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Borgo San Lorenzo is second, 0.7 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in Savelli on lap 8 is third, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Five minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy is second. The race dictator in Quarantayo is third, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. The race dictator passed that Canadian guy for P2. That Canadian guy in Buccine is third, 0.1 behind the race dictator. Todd from New Zealand in Buccine is sixth, 2.9 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator in San Donato is P3, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Todd is sixth, 2.8 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator on lap 9 is P3, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. Todd is sixth, 2.5 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator in Quarantayo on lap 9 is third, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Todd in Quarantayo is sixth, 1.7 behind YH8 Racing. race dictator in Rettilineo is third, 0.1 behind that Canadian guy. Todd in Rettilineo is 6th. Best lap is a 1:58.499. 0.046 off the fastest lap. The race dictator in Borgo San Lorenzo is P3, 0.6 behind that Canadian guy. Todd in Monte Rossi is P6, 0.6 behind YH8 Racing. The race dictator from New Zealand in Scarperia is third, 0.7 behind that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Corintaio is second, 0.3 ahead of the race dictator. The race dictator in Buccine is P3 driving a Porsche, 0.4 behind that Canadian guy. The leader has just finished the race. Jason Short finished first. That Canadian guy finished second. The race dictator finished third. Illis finished fourth. YH8 Racing finished P5. Todd finished 6th. Chris Butt is 7th. Chris Butt finished P7. Johnny Prince finished 8th. Broadcast bot is 9th. The race session is at Autodromo del Mugello in Scarperia, Italy. Johnny Prince from New Zealand is first. Chris Butt from New Zealand is P2. Todd from New Zealand is third. 20 minutes remaining in the session. Race start. Todd is now P5. Chris Butt is second. Chris Butt is now P5. Jason Short from New Zealand is P2. Jason Short is now P7. Jason Short lost P7 to that Canadian guy. Johnny Prince in Borgo San Lorenzo is second. Todd is third. Chris Butt is fourth. Chris Butt is now third. The race dictator from New Zealand is P4. Chris Butt is P3. Chris Butt lost P5 to YH8 Racing. YH8 Racing from New Zealand in Rettilineo is P5, 0.1 behind Johnny Prince. Johnny Prince is fifth, driving a McLaren, battling YH8 Racing. Johnny Prince is now P4. That Canadian guy from Canada in Poggio Seco is P5, 0.4 ahead of Chris Butt. Chris Butt in Borgo San Lorenzo is P6, 0.6 ahead of Jason Short. That Canadian guy on lap 2 is P5, 0.4 behind Johnny Prince. Todd in Pelagio is second, 0.5 behind Ilisv. That Canadian guy in Corintaio on lap 2 is P5, 0.1 behind Johnny Prince. That Canadian guy is now P4. Todd in Buccine is P2, 0.5 behind Ilisv. Jason Short is fifth, 0.4 behind that Canadian guy. Ilisv from New Zealand in Laco is P2. Best lap is a 2:00.416. 1.603 off the fastest lap. Jason Short in Paggio Seco is 5th, 0.5 behind that Canadian guy. Illis Vincevelli is 2nd, 0.4 behind Todd. Todd was 1.6 faster last lap. 15 minutes remaining in the session. Jason Short in Arrabbiata 1 is P5, 0.3 behind that Canadian guy. Illis from New Zealand is 2nd, 0.9 ahead of the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator was 1.3 faster last lap. The Race Dictator in Biondetti is P3, 1.0 behind Illis. That Canadian guy in Puccine is P5 driving a Toyota, 0.7 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator on lap 4 is P3, 0.8 behind Illis. That Canadian guy from Canada is 5th, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator in Borgo San Lorenzo on lap 4 is 3rd, 0.5 behind Illis. The Race Dictator was 1.5 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in Savelli is P5, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator in Scarperia is 3rd, 0.3 behind Illis. That Canadian guy is 5th, 0.9 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator is P3, 0.3 behind Illis. Race Dictator passed Illis for 2nd. Illis in Rettilineo is P3 battling the Race Dictator. Illis passed the Race Dictator for P2. That Canadian guy is P5, 0.8 behind Jason Short. Illis in Paggio Seco is 3rd, 0.7 behind the Race Dictator. That Canadian guy in Borgo San Lorenzo is P5 driving a Toyota, 0.9 behind Jason Short. Illis in Arrabbiata 2 on lap 5 is P3, 1.7 behind the Race Dictator. That Canadian guy in Pelagio is P5. Best lap is a 1:59.192. 0.379 off the fastest lap. Illusv is P3, 2.0 behind the Race Dictator. The Race Dictator was 0.8 faster last lap. 10 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy in Buccine is 5th, 0.7 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator in San Donato is 2nd, 1.9 behind Todd. The Race Dictator was 0.5 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in Poggio Seco on lap 6 is 5th, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Casanova on lap 6 is 5th, battling that Canadian guy. Jason Short passed that Canadian guy for P4. That Canadian guy is 5th, 0.1 behind Jason Short. The Race Dictator in Corintaio is P2, 1.9 behind Todd. That Canadian guy on lap 6 is 5th, 1.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Rettilineo is P4, 1.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. Race Dictator in Poggio Seco is P2 driving a Porsche, 1.6 behind Todd. That Canadian guy in Borgo San Lorenzo is 5th. Best lap is a 1:58.892. 0.631 off the fastest lap. Jason Short in Arrabbiata 2 is 4th driving a Toyota, 1.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Pelagio is P5, 1.0 behind Jason Short. That Canadian guy is now 4th. Jason Short in Biondetti is 3rd, 0.1 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Buccine is 4th. Jason Short from New Zealand is 4th, battling that Canadian guy. Jason Short passed that Canadian guy for P3. That Canadian guy in Poggio Seco is P4, 0.2 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Casanova is third, 0.5 ahead of that Canadian guy. 5 minutes remaining in the session. That Canadian guy in Arabia 1 on lap 8 is P4, 0.5 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is P3, 0.6 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Biondetti is P4, 0.4 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Rettilineo is third. Best lap is a 1:59.149. 0.888 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy in San Donato is P4. YH8 Racing in San Donato is P7, 2.1 behind Johnny Prince. YH8 Racing passed Johnny Prince for 6th. Jason Short in Savelli is P3, 2.3 ahead of that Canadian guy. That Canadian guy in Scarperia on lap 9 is 4th, 1.9 behind Jason Short. Jason Short is P3. Best lap is a 1:58.969. 0.708 off the fastest lap. That Canadian guy in Buccine is P4, 2.3 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Rettilineo is P3, 0.8 behind Illisf. Jason Short was 1.6 faster last lap. That Canadian guy in Poggio Seco is P4. Jason Short in Casanova is third, 1.0 behind Illisf. That Canadian guy is P4, 1.8 behind Jason Short. Jason Short in Corintaio is third driving a Toyota, 0.9 behind Illisf. That Canadian guy is P4. The leader has just finished the race. Todd finished P1. Illis finished P2. Jason Short finished 3rd. That Canadian guy finished 4th. The race dictator finished P5. YH8 Racing finished P6. Johnny Prince is 7th. Johnny Prince finished P7. Chris Butt is P8. Chris Butt finished P8. Broadcast Bot is 9th.